1 year on, and Victoria 3 delivers a massive anniversary update, looking at unit formations and military graphics, alongside some economic changes like local state prices, or perhaps more broadly, the formation of new nation-states. This one is a biggie, encompassing all aspects of the game, so sit back and relax, and let me take you through some of the big, highlighted changes in Victoria 3's 1.5 update, and my thanks to Paradox Interactive for sponsoring this video and giving me an early access look at the DLC and the update. If you'd like to check out Victoria 3, I'd encourage you to use my link below. Now let's jump into the video. Starting with the military, a big focus for this update, and indeed the start of this video, military graphics and travel systems. Two changes, both very cool and long requested, but also there are changes behind the scenes here as well, into how we manage our armies, how we position them around the map, and more. You now assign commanders and units of specific types to these armies or fleets, which can be created and disbanded. All of the military configuration and control, like the unit hiring that I'm doing here, upgrading, disbanding, and conscripting battalions, is all done inside of these new formations rather than through buildings. And of course, many things have changed over time in Victoria 3, and another one of them is some of the UI around these armies, including mobilization options that you can see here, as well as their broader morale and organization, things that you must take into account. Now, these formations are, of course, as I mentioned earlier, set against a beautiful and now much more alive backdrop on the map. Both visual changes in and around the borders, but also to your units. Now, you can see your armies travel across the world. As you deploy them to different front lines, you'll not only actually have them fighting there, but get to see them doing it. These front lines will change a little bit dynamically, the military graphics, of course, reflecting the progress of the battle and the movement of the front line. And we'll continue to see more of those as we move through, specifically now to look at the unit formations and the military management. As I mentioned earlier, all of this is now done, all of the configuration and the control within these formations rather than buildings. The formations have organization score, which impacts all kinds of things that might be relevant to you as you try and stomp across to take out Outer Manchuria. Good luck to you this early on. Offense, defense, morale gain, recovery, all of that is incorporated inside of here. And of course, if you're looking to do a naval invasion, well, the interface in and around that has changed too. It's not just the front line and the battle graphics that have changed here, but also the way it actually works, the user interface and the user experience. Likewise, both armies and your fleets can be controlled in different ways using the new navigation system. I like these C nodes in particular, a great way not just to visualize what you're doing, but also assign direct orders to specific commanders. Another nice change that really brings a little bit more detail into warfare. Likewise, the UI has seen a series of other changes around naval invasions, around transferring units, and all of it comes together to produce, I think, a military system that's not just more engaging to use, but also, of course, as you can tell, feels better to use, with more specific control denoted to our generals, our fleets, our commanders, rather than at that building level. I think it helps to take away some of the superficial feeling of war and make it much more impactful. I also like how some of the other broader, maybe less covered mechanics, like for example the different ways that these armies will retreat when I absolutely dominate them, it really highlights the changes in this update. From the big things down to the little things, like watching an army flee in panic, or assigning a more specific order to one of your more dedicated commanders. It's entirely up to you, but warfare isn't all that's changed in this update. While it may be more visually impactful than some of the other changes, there's more to unpack. Let's take a look at state trading. Diplomacy is the tool that we're using to do this, and also some new formable nations. I'll show you 2 for 1 here. Of course, in this case, I'm using it in a slightly cheesy way at the start of the game to try and establish Romania so that I can play from the very beginning as them. But of course, you could also use the state trading tool inside of the game to trade with the AI, or perhaps your friends, to exchange some states. Now, the AI won't just mindlessly do it. It does actually have states that it's interested in, or not interested in, and that will have a big impact on how it trades with you. So you're not just going to do some ridiculous things, but what it does unlock is the ability to actually exchange states without having to commit to an all-out war. Or, of course, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, you could use it in the beginning to maybe cheese the creation of a new state that you want to play as. Now, some of them are, of course, much larger than others. There are plenty to play with. Personally, one of my favorite ways to play the game. If you're interested in some of the new states making a potential appearance, here you can see some of the others on screen. From the mighty Holy Roman Empire out to a new touch inside of the Colossus of the South region, Rio de la Plata, it's up to you. If you're interested in controlling land in a slightly different way, maybe the Colonial Administration and the expansion around that could be of interest to you. Now, of course, this will build on some of the military changes and the other diplomatic changes that have taken place in Victoria 3. Starting once you've unlocked Civilizing Mission, you'll have this new journal entry to establish a colonial administration in the areas, at least the areas where you have a foothold. Here, playing as France, I can establish one, wham, bam. Thank you, ma'am. This is under my control now, and there are some really interesting options right from the word go. Do I want it to be the French Senegalese company, or perhaps should we let the Catholic missions uplift the local populace? It's up to you, and of course it will have different impacts, not just on interest groups, but also on the outputs of the economy itself. It will operate as a relatively autonomous region, though through a new imposition of laws mechanic, you will get some control over them if you desire it. Other new laws, by the way, also include this frontier colonization mechanic, handy for nations like Japan and others. Moving through to some more dollar bill changes. Local state prices and companies are the feature here. Local state prices is a big one. Obviously, if you're playing as a minor state, it will add more variety to that, but also for the big players in the game too. Local prices are influenced by supply and demand, as you might expect, alongside broader market conditions. But it's also important to note that this is now capped in and around something called market access price impact, and the modifier in and around that. It means that local production and consumption will always matter when determining the price of a good in a state, and you can influence it a little bit using a variety of tools such as laws like traditionalism. For example, you might want to move that one out of the way and maybe move yourself into something a little bit more advanced. And if advanced economic activity is your goal, then perhaps with the unlock of corporate charters or other possible avenues, you might want to lean into the new companies feature. The companies feature is a really neat one, and it allows you to really focus and escalate specific areas or industries within your nation. I believe there are about 100 special, specific, historically flavored companies, as well as a broad number of basic ones. What do they do in practice? Well, they have a bunch of buildings associated to them. They'll improve throughput and construction speed of those building types. And if your company is more prosperous than the global average, you'll get special bonus modifiers too. A really neat touch. I like it a lot. And so, obviously, we've discussed a lot of broad change here inside of the 1.5 update. Multiple battles along those newly designed front lines, companies, you name it. And of course it comes on the backdrop of other changes that have taken place throughout Victoria 3's first year as well, focusing not just on war but on diplomacy, maybe on the role of agitators, interest groups now more specialized and focused in and around the nations that they come from, and of course the entire sort of government and laws system has been revamped too, and that's really just scratching the surface. If we think about the other big DLC changes, like Voice of the People, and the various other free flavor elements that have been added through journal entries and many other ways, Victoria 3 has changed. And it's also changed with the Colossus of the South DLC pack, a relatively small flavor pack focused in and around South America, in and around Brazil in particular, and some of the events that surround not just that nation and whether it moves in a monarchical direction or the first Brazilian Empire, but more broadly in the region in and around it too, with events focusing on, for example, exploring the Amazon. The paid DLC includes 19 new journal entries from Populism through to the Old Republic, as well as over 200 new historical characters and 100 new events. And it's important to note that this comes along changes that were free to everyone as well inside of the 1.5 update, which includes some events and historical characters, as well as new cultures and ideology, and so much more. Thank you for joining me in this whirlwind look at Victoria 3's anniversary update, 1.5 and more. Thank you also to Paradox for sponsoring this video. You can check out Victoria 3 using the link below. I'd highly appreciate it. And I'd also love your feedback. How do you think Victoria 3 has handled its first year? How has it addressed those criticisms that emerged at launch? And what do you reckon it'll look like moving forward? Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you next time.